Welcome to the Album Nerds Podcast with your hosts, Andy, Don, and Dude.
Headed to the 90s, living in a wild, wild west.
Wild West.
I remember that song.
It's Album Nerds Podcast. I'm Dude. I got Andy and Don with me. Andy, what's up, my man?
Yo, bro. It's a 411 with you, buddy.
411. Oh my God. That means information, folks. 411. Don, how you doing, man?
Hello, in 90s reference.
We'll fill that in later.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the Album Nerds Podcast. We love talking about albums. That's what we're going to do today. So we have a great show for you. We're going to be talking about 3 albums that were released in the year 1990, answer a question, talk about what we learned, and then spin the wheel of musical destiny at the end of the show to find out what kind of albums we'll talk about next week. But this time it's all about 1990.
That's what I'm talking about!
Okay, well, lots happened in 1990. East and West Germany were reunited, which resulted in the demolition of the Berlin Wall. The Hubble Space Telescope was launched. Iraq invaded Kuwait. Nelson Mandela was released from prison in South Africa. The world lost Jim Henson, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Ava Gardner, and Sammy Davis Jr., but we gained Margot Robbie, Emma Watson, Jennifer Lawrence, and The Weeknd.
Wait, we gained them?
I like that. I think that's funny.
Oh, that's when they were born.
Yes, there you go. The top films of 1990 were Home Alone, Pretty Woman, and Ghost. The top television shows were Roseanne, 60 Minutes, and Cheers. And the top songs were Sinead O'Connor's Nothing Compares to You, Roxette's Must Have Been Love, and Wilson Phillips' Hold On. Now, today, each of us will present an album released in 1990.
All right, so, 1990. I remember that year quite fondly. I was young enough to have no responsibilities, but old enough to try to pretend like I was a grown-up. Sweet times.
It's a good spot to be in.
Teenage years in the suburbs. So I didn't really do anything. I already had an album in mind, so I didn't really listen to anything else this week.
Really?
It was quite, yeah.
That might be the first time.
Yeah, I decided to take a vacation from driving myself crazy listening to 30 records and then can't make a freaking decision. How'd you guys do?
Man, I would have thought you would have just gone crazy with 1990.
Well, you lived it.
I could have lost myself, so I decided I was just going.
For me, there was a lot of new stuff I was uncovering. LL Cool J's Mama Said to Knock You Out was something I had been meaning to listen to for a long time, and I finally got around to. Pretty enjoyable record, supposedly one among his best. Another hip-hop record I'll mention, Brand Nubian, One for All, a group I was not familiar with, but excellent record. Also had Tribe Called Quest's debut record that year, which is quite good as well. And I'll mention a fun punk rock record I found from Australia from a band called Hard-Ons. The record is called Yummy. It was pretty awesome. It sounded just like mid-90s, like pop punk, kind of like that will become popular in like 5 or 10 years. So yeah, I really enjoyed that as well.
Well, 1990 is about the time I was really kind of finding my own way, I think, with my musical taste. But there's a couple of records we've done before that I wanted to mention. Depeche Mode, Violator, Sinead O'Connor's I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got. But a couple others that I think I'll get to at some point. An album from an artist called The Lightning Seeds, called Cloud Cuckoo Land. It's a producer named Ian Brody. And then Brian Eno and John Cale did a collaboration, an album called Wrong Way Up, which is, pretty interesting.
All right, let's go to 1990, musically, of course.
You choose me?
We're going to be talking to Sonic Youth very soon. In the meantime, though, we thought we'd remind ourselves about the history of Sonic Youth, of course, who are arguably one of the most influential bands on the US hardcore scene over the past 10 years.
All right, from a 1990 selection, we are indeed talking about Sonic Youth and their 1990 album, Goo. Let's play a little bit from the lead single, Cool Thing. What are you doing?
Is that Iris? What is that?
Yeah, the Goo Goo Dolls. That's what we're listening to, right?
The Goo Goo Dolls?
No?
Goo.
No. It's the wrong kind of goo.
Yeah, they totally ripped that off.
Alright, so Goo is the 6th full-length album for the 4-piece from New York City.
New York City.
Yes, New York City.
I think that commercial is from 1990.
New York City!
It's the follow-up to their acclaimed album Daydream Nation. Yeah, so Cool Thing was the lead single. Supposedly it's about LL Cool J and Kim Gordon's meeting with him. Interestingly features Chuck D. It's one of those early kind of like rock and hip-hop crossovers, so it's not really, I wouldn't call it a hip-hop song.
I think they were recording, was it Fear of a Black Planet at the same time?
At the same studio, and they kind of saw each other. Made sense to work together. Did you guys hear that song growing up? Was that like on the radio and like in public?
Not to me.
I used to see the video on 120 Minutes, and that was probably that was the only Sonic Youth song I knew.
If I had cable, that's all I would have done is watch MTV. So
yeah,
I did not. So I missed a lot of stuff.
Yeah. This record definitely got some MTV airplay. It was kind of their, I guess I would say, one of their like mainstream breakthrough, I guess, as much as you could say for the Sonic Youth had. Daydream Nation got them a lot of notoriety in like the underground scene, but this record was a little bit more stripped down and a little bit more accessible, if you could say that, than some of their earlier work. The 3 words I use to describe it are goo for all.
Ugh.
You want some of that good goo, buddy?
I don't know.
Undecided on the goo. Yeah, I think in particular, this record really put Kim Gordon on the map. She was front and center on vocals on many tracks on this album, and she kind of helped push that more female perspective in music, especially in rock music, which was, coming out of the 80s was very male-dominated time in rock, and she was kind of bringing this other voice to the industry. So I think that was pretty cool and pretty exciting at the time.
It's interesting that you had these female bass players in these alternative groups, right? So you had her with Sonic Youth, you had Kim Deal from the Pixies, and Darcy, don't know her last name, from Smashing Pumpkins.
Mm-hmm. I think she just goes by Darcy. Yeah, no, it's definitely a blooming trend here at this time. And I think it was pretty exciting.
We didn't trust them with lead guitar yet.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it was like, oh well, you want to be in the band? I guess you could play bass.
Can't mess that up too bad.
And a step up from tambourine, so several steps up, many steps up from tambourine.
It's a process. All right, let's play another cut from the record. This is a little bit of Mildred Pierce.
So that's kind of the Sonic Youth sound to me, that, I don't know, kind of that fuzzed out guitar that's, just sort of, it's almost like a painted landscape or something like that, kind of hypnotic. But Mildred Pierce is actually, so that's a reference to the Joan Crawford film. Have you guys ever seen that? It's on Turner Classic Movies all the time.
What, it's called Mildred Pierce?
Yep.
No.
But really good movie, and weird scream at the end. Because the song is just kind of going on instrumentally, like you just heard, and then at the end, all of a sudden, there's like this hardcore scream. Apparently, that song is one they had come up with back, when the band first started, and they finally put it on record. So the 3 words I chose to describe the album are just fuzzed guitar landscapes. So you've got, 2 guitars there. It's often heavy and distorted, but it's not like thrashy. I don't know. It's, I can't really describe it, but it's almost like you're just awash in these, this guitar spiral or something. And I think that, along with like thrash and metal sort of helped that 90s alternative sound. I think this is an excellent record. It's maybe like the right balance of accessibility and noise. So there are, some kind of catchier sort of melodic moments, but they never completely sell out towards that. And they just throw in a lot of this noise. I really like the Kim Gordon songs, the ones that she sings and did the lyrics for. So like Cool Thing. There's the one Tunic, a song for Karen, which is about, Karen Carpenter, and anorexia, which was really cool.
Well, to be clear, anorexia was not cool, but the song was.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, I guess this sort of came out of like what they called like a no wave movement. I like, some of this sort of like post-punk guitar work because you can't really find the blues in it. The blues guitar sort of dominates rock and roll, and you can't really find it on this Sonic Youth record anyway. I actually read that is it Thurston Moore? He actually had been listening to Nirvana Bleach when this album was made, and he was actually trying to capture that sound.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, let me play one more cut from the record. This is the opener, Dirty Boots.
Yeah, I enjoy how well they capture chaos with their noise rock sound.
It's chaotic, but there's still like some forward movement happening there.
Well, it's the bass is taking it forward. The bass groove, I feel, is what is driving it forward, even though, you've got lyrics. There are other lyrics in the song, but the Dirty Boots, baby, is so old school rock and roll,
Yeah, totally.
So somehow it worked. So I had never listened to this album in total. I've heard a few of their others over the years. I did enjoy it. The 3 words I used to describe it was post-punk leap. So you had your post-punk new wave movement in the late 70s, early 80s. Talking Heads had a bass player that was a woman as well. But yeah, so I think that's interesting. So this did remind me some of the Talking Heads in terms of the dynamics. It just is dirtier. They put more grit on it. They took some of the new wave sheen off of it. What did you say earlier, Don? Instead of new wave?
No wave.
No wave. I think that's a perfect description of what I was thinking. I didn't find that term, but I would have cleverly woven it into my little speech here had I known about it. This album moved nicely. The songs were interesting, all of them. I did like Kim's work as well. That just totally different vibe on those songs, even though they still had that dirty sound to them. So Dirty Boots, I kind of gathered, could be about a lot of things. Youth culture, what they were calling slam dancing or moshing. Perhaps it could be traveling. You put on your boots and you go on tour. You go experience life in your boots. The dirtier your boots are, the more experience you've had, is kind of what I was taking from that, baby. So yeah, all in all, I was pretty happy with the listening experience, and I will go back to this and maybe play around a little bit more with their discography.
Yeah, I think arguably this was the high peak of their discography. So yeah, if you haven't heard Goo, I think it's definitely one of the more accessible and one of the more fun to come back to Sonic Youth records. So check it out.
I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
If you're enjoying the show, and we hope you are, do us a solid and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Maybe we made you laugh, or you discovered an album you enjoy. Leaving a review keeps the show going and helps other music fans find us.
And we were going to New York to record, and there were lots of groups like the Peach Boys and the Bebox Boys and the Beastie Boys. So we thought we'd become the Pet Shop Boys, because the boys sounded New York and the Pet Shop sounded really kind of English and weird.
He said it. I didn't.
So the album I chose from 1990 was one called Behaviour by the Pet Shop Boys, released in October of that year. Here's the opening cut from that album, Being Boring.
A cache of photos and invitations to teenage parties. Dress in white, one said with quotations from someone.
Well, I've actually been reading some essays about that particular song, and some claim that it's sort of tells the story of maybe the gay nightlife experience of the 20th century. So like the first verse refers to the 1920s. So if you picture, it's the roaring 20s and sort of that Great Gatsby time, that might have been an era where, maybe gay men were, allowed to be sort of out there. And then the second verse is the 1970s and of course, disco. And then, the 90s, he says in that third verse, he says, some are here and some are missing. So it's AIDS has taken lives. The title Being Boring is actually a reference to a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald's wife, Zelda Fitzgerald. She refused to be bored chiefly because she wasn't boring. And so in that first verse, when it says someone's wife, a famous writer, that's the reference there. So it's a subtle melody. It's not the catchiest thing in the world, but it's a pretty deep track. Just all I said about it there. There's a lot going on. The instrumentation, it sounds like something, from a 70s R&B record, I think, only maybe subtler. And actually, Axl Rose is a fan of this song. Apparently, during their 1991 tour, he went backstage and they had not played that song. It wasn't part of the set list. And, so
he threw the mic at them and then stormed off?
Yeah. Well, he expressed his disappointment. So they ended up, later in the tour adding it as an encore. So this is the fourth studio album by the English synth pop duo formed in London in 1981. It's Neil Tennant, who does the vocals, and Chris Lowe, who does the keyboard and whatever else electronic people do. The three words I chose to describe the album are Pet Shop Men.
Ooh.
It's just a more mature version of the Pet Shop Boys. These aren't the guys that were singing let's make lots of money. I don't know. A lot of times they kind of have like crass lyrics and sort of weird pop cultural funny things to say. There's not a lot of that going on in this album. It's not quite as catchy as their other albums, but I don't know, it just has more of a vibe, right? And a feel that I think carries throughout the album that makes it just sort of a cohesive piece of music. Even though there's, a lot of different subject matter covered, right? So you've got sort of the gay nightlife in Being Boring. You've got traditional love and loss. You've got stories, dreams of Catholic grammar school. You've got phony pop stars, alcoholism, the Russian Revolution. So it's all here with these, electronic pseudo dancey vibes.
That reminded me of your explanation there reminded me of when the grandpa in The Princess Bride is trying to convince his grandson to listen to him read the book. We got knights, there's sword fights,
giants, monsters, chases, escapes.
Right. So I will shut up. Here's a song called "How Can You Expect to Be Taken Seriously?"
Tell me, baby, how you really hate publicity. How can you expect to be taken?
It's got that classic early 90s sound in it.
I can picture Belle Biv DeVoe dancing to that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's got a little New Jack Swing deal going on there. So yeah, I think I was probably drawn to that song the most just because I got what it was about, kind of satirizing the big rock stars of the time, maybe like Madonna's and U2 and things where these people are so enjoying the smell of their own farts and being so into themselves. They're so important at that point that how can you expect to be taken seriously when you actually seem like a buffoon, right? So that was kind of the vibe I was getting from this. Jealous. So the three words I chose to describe this album are electronic air supply. I'm not a big Pet Shop Boys fan, but like, was it West End Girls or... Mm-hmm. That sound of theirs that was a little more, I guess, a little grittier. And Don, you kind of touched on it where this is a more mature version. It sounds like the electronic version of sort of that adult contemporary to me. The tempos are all kind of very slow and similar. It is dance music, but it's like kind of, you're not going to hurt your hip doing the dancing to this. You know what I'm saying?
That's true.
Yeah, that was kind of the, and I enjoyed it. I liked the record way more than I expected. It's not a knock necessarily. It's just not what I was expecting for it to be sort of this cooled version.
Is it synth yacht rock?
Don is finding all different ways of bringing yacht rock to us.
Making everything into yacht rock. I don't think it's quite there. It's a very enjoyable album.
So the album was produced by a German gentleman named Harold Faltermeyer, who is actually famous for the song Axel F from the Beverly Hills Cop soundtrack. Are you guys familiar with that?
Of course.
How's it go down?
Oh, we're getting a copyright strike for that.
Oh,
definitely. You nailed it.
Yeah, so strangely, like a lot of the synth pop records in this late 80s, early 90s period, you have these groups still sort of clinging to analog synthesizers, for one reason or another. Let's hear the final track on the album. This is Jealousy.
When you said you would, do you lie? Do you try to keep in touch? You know you could. I tried to see your point of view, could not hear or see for.
Told you they were jealous.
He called it. So I had read that Jealousy was the first song that the duo had written together way back in the day. Is that true, Don?
Yep. Actually, I think I've read that other places beyond Wikipedia. So yeah, that seems to be
Wow. Okay. Well, then, if you've got two sources, then we're good.
It's pretty cool to bring a song back after all those years. I enjoyed that track, and I enjoyed this record overall. But I kind of felt similarly to Dude, as that it's such a subdued sound they're going for here, especially in comparison to their slightly more edgy earlier work.
That's the word, edgy. Yeah. I like that. Thank you.
Slightly more edgy. Three words I used to describe this record are never boring, but close. I think there's a handful of songs on here that just don't really move the needle much for me. Everything's at such a low simmer. I kept found myself wondering, is there enough going on here to really be saying something? I think the opening cut being boring and a handful of others I enjoyed So Hard, which is probably the most dancey track on the record. But I think so much of it feels like they're pushing back that danciness side of their sound that they had for, a decade or so, and then kind of getting lost in this in-between space, I guess. It just feels like it's very in-between record. Though I think it's very pleasant, and I really enjoyed, is it Tennant? Is that how you say his name? Or Tennant?
Yeah.
I enjoyed Tennant's vocal delivery here. It's very warm and pleasant, and just neatly articulates every word he utters, and it feels very British and very European. I mean, it's unescapable. Yeah, very, very buttoned up. Totally. Charming, but for me, it didn't really say a lot. I didn't really relate to it too closely.
I would encourage you guys to spend more time with the record, because I remember even, as a 14-year-old boy who was a fan of the Pet Shop Boys, when I first got this album, I'm like, it did seem boring to me, but I listened to it a lot, and it's really become my favorite Pet Shop Boys album, and really one of my favorite albums of all time.
Really? Oh, wow.
Now, would you consider yourself a Pet Shop Boy? I mean, is there a fan club?
It's a Pet Shop man.
Professor Pet Shop.
Professor Pet Shop.
Okay, anyway, so that was Pet Shop Boys with their 1990 album, Behaviour.
Excuse me. I'd like to ask you a few questions.
It's that time on the show when we ask ourselves a question. So 1990 had plenty of memorable moments in the world of entertainment. The Simpsons and Seinfeld were picking up steam. Dances with Wolves and Goodfellas were playing at the movies. We got Milli Vanilli admitting to lip-syncing hits such as Girl, You Know It's True. I forgot they got their Grammy revoked.
Yeah.
Well, now no one cares. All of those dancing fools that perform lip sync all the time, and no one cares anymore.
All right. Well, what were you guys up to and enjoying at the beginning of the 1990s? Andy, you were just a young fella.
Yeah, I was a wee lad of 9.
Yeah.
So the things that I were into were probably not the things that were super popular at the time, mostly like He-Man and G.I. Joe. But I do remember very clearly first hearing Vanilla Ice and Crisscross in school on a cassette tape someone had on a Walkman. We passed it around, and I was kind of blown away by that, and I rushed out and had my dad buy me MC Hammer's Please Hammer Don't Hurt Him, or whatever that was called.
That's the one, yeah.
So hip-hop, I guess, was kind of what was cool for me at that time, and that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I was into stuff like Parker Lewis Can't Lose.
What's Parker Lewis Can't Lose?
It was a TV show on Fox that was kind of like a Ferris Bueller type of character.
Okay. Smartass.
Yeah, a lot of the like jock guys in high school called me Parker because I sort of looked like that kid, I sort of dressed like that kid, and I was always like scheming and getting in trouble and stuff. So I was pretty proud of that at the time. I was more of a pop music guy at the time, so top 40 stuff. Without MTV to shape me, I was kind of floating. I'd go from being all into hip hop, and then I'd go to a bunch of rock stuff. I was not finding an identity, and I got there by the mid-90s.
Give it a year or two.
Well, you guys can, probably guess the kind of music I was listening to. Yeah, I guess like Dude, I was drawn to the Fox network, which had, shows like Parker Lewis Can't Lose, which were geared towards younger audiences. In Living Color, and, was on at that time. And actually, it only lasted one season, but I was really into that show, Alien Nation.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Aliens?
Well, it was based on, there was a film from like 1987 that starred like James Caan and Mandy Patinkin, about these, these aliens who come. So they're sort of introduced into American life, and there's, prejudice and stuff like that. And so Alienation, you actually have one of the newcomers is, how they're referred to. A newcomer is a detective.
He got partnered with that guy that looked like Mick Jagger, right?
Yep. Yes.
Yeah. But the thing, Andy, these were just like regular people, except they were bald. Their head was shaped a little funny, and it had dots on it.
They would get drunk on sour milk.
Oh, God.
So this is a comedy? Like a...
No,
this is a drama, man.
Kind of sci-fi drama.
Okay.
It only lasted one season, but there was such outcry from fans like me that they did end up making like 4 or 5 TV movies afterwards, kind of continuing the story. Anyway,
Sounds epic.
Yeah, it certainly was.
I'm sure that's really easy to find now. If you want to help out the show, gift Don the DVD box set of Alien Nation.
What were you doing in 1990? What were you enjoying? Let us know. Hit us up on the socials and the Discord, albumnerds.com/Discord.
The name Alice in Chains comes from our pet goat, Alice.
Or our next door neighbor, Alice.
Or the next door neighbor. That's funny.
I'm going with Alice in Chains, their 1990 release, Facelift. Why don't we jump right in with arguably their best known song, Man in the Box.
Oh, what's in the box?
Okay, so Facelift, debut studio album released on Columbia Records, released August 21st, 1990 by Alice in Chains. They were formed in Seattle, Washington in 1987. Original lineup here, Lane Staley on vocals, Jerry Cantrell guitar and vocals, Mike Starr on bass, and Sean Kinney on drums. They're considered one of the pioneering groups of the grunge music movement. These bands were starting to get signed, but they were to a major label. They were more viewed at the time in the metal space because there really wasn't anywhere else to put them. And they actually had a hit, a gold record before Nirvana, before grunge in Seattle busted wide open. So I kind of think they have a special place where they didn't need that. They were already establishing themselves, and they probably would have been a metal band with a different take on it. But they wouldn't have been thrown into that grunge thing. I could, they were like opening for Metallica and bands like Guns N' Roses and stuff. I think they would have been in that category. The 3 words I used to describe this album were metal with rust. The Seattle sound was a lot of things, metal, punk, hard rock, forged after years of being in a rainy sort of scene that was all to itself. And I think that kind of atmosphere of these bands competing to play in clubs built this dark, dank thing that became Alice in Chains.
It's a rainy, dark sound they have. developed here. Yeah, it's heavy and slow.
It's hard to put your finger on what's dark about it. I mean, the lyrics are somewhat, but it's just that.
There's a weight.
That guitar sound. Yeah. It sits on your chest. It's the beginning. It's the blend of those vocals between Jerry and Lane. Lane takes a lot more of the lead here than he does later as they develop their sound and got more into those harmonies, that haunting harmony, that darkness. I mean, there's just something so dank about all the songs, even though these are not nearly as dark as it gets later. This is before Lane was losing himself to drug addiction. Aren't songs about that here, which is part of what makes this album very enjoyable to me, why I like it so much as the years have gone on. The first one I got was Dirt, and then I went back and got this, and now I think I prefer this one just because it doesn't have that. I know too much about what happened to Lane and his struggles with drugs and overdose, so it's nice to just hear them be them. All right, why don't we listen to a little bit of I Can't Remember.
Yeah, to me this very much sounds like a debut, a band that has some cool ideas and some talent, but still trying to figure out how to use everything together and how to play as a group. The 3 words I use to describe it are put back in the box. It's not quite done yet. The parts are here, but I'm not sure they really understand how to use everything together yet. The beginning of the record, I think, is excellent. If this was like a 4-song EP, I think this would be heralded as one of the triumphs of the era, but I think it does lose its way as it continues on, and there's a handful, a lot of tracks I think just kind of stumble about, don't have much direction or momentum. But there is just some inherent things that the group has I think are great, and they develop them later on in their career, and I think that becomes a little more interesting. But there's the pieces that are here. Bleed the Freak I think could have been like a pretty big single if they had released that at the time. The rest of the record, I was just surprised at how sort of blindly it navigates itself. Was how I felt.
This exercise, listening to it, it was way better than I remembered. It's been a while since I listened to it, and I had always felt the same, that it was top heavy, that the best stuff was at the beginning. But I found as I listened to it, I was really starting to enjoy songs like Love, Hate, Love, and I Ain't Like That, and Confusion. I kind of changed my mind. I mean, it's almost like 2 different EPs in a way. That second half has its own sort of flavor, and it's a little more, it's a little less heavy, but a little bit more. I think that's where the playground where some of the future sounds is coming from, is in that area, the second half.
Yeah, you can hear them experimenting and trying things out for sure.
All right, well, why don't we listen to one of those later tracks? Love, Hate, Love.
Yeah, it's one of the, I guess, more like a slower and kind of more epic track. I believe it's the longest one on the album. I wasn't sure exactly what to make of the lyrics. Almost sounded like he was, going to murder somebody. I found a quote that's attributed to Staley. I mean, I guess you never know. But he said, that was a song about myself and my girlfriend, and I wrote it during a time when I was treating her really badly and didn't know how to break the pattern. It was kind of therapeutic, when you really don't know how to break a sick pattern. Then you write it down and sing it, and it kind of breaks the pattern.
That's cool.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. And I like the idea that, he's actually using, a lyrical exercise to, as therapy. The 3 words I chose to describe the album, it's actually more than 3 words: hard rock, thrash, and rain. Similar to what you guys already said, right? So, it's like a fusion of, I think, more of your traditional sounding kind of bluesy rock, like from Aerosmith and AC/DC. But I think it's also informed by like the thrash of Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax. And it actually, now that I think about it, I feel like maybe Alice in Chains, more than the other grunge bands, maybe used more of that thrash sound than the others did. Maybe not Soundgarden. I feel like maybe Soundgarden did, but I don't remember a lot of thrashing from like Pearl Jam.
Yeah, and like Soundgarden to me had more of a Motorhead-ishness to them.
Yeah, oh, that's true.
Maybe because of bad motor finger.
Oh, right, that makes sense. Yeah, and so of course I do think that the rain of Seattle probably has an influence on these bands. So there is that darkness. It's cool that they're able to create that sort of dark atmosphere without a lot of extra instrumentation. It's just guitars. I didn't hear a lot of strings or keyboards thrown in, and so they're able to kind of use the empty space, I think, to create that dark vibe, which is really cool. Listening to this album and paying attention, I was really blown away by Staley's vocals. I mean, they're just so charismatic, and it's not something I ever appreciated. I mean, I think early on, I was just not open to this kind of thing when I was young, but it was just the guy going, but I mean, even in the cut you played of Man in the Box, I mean, the way he's singing just changes so much. He ends up like kind of crooning at the end, and he's just got so much power behind it. And so different from like the metal singing of like Dio or Axl Rose, I guess kind of somehow like a masculine vibe to it or something. I don't know.
That's, again, I said it earlier, part of why I learned to really appreciate this album is I just get to hear more Lane.
Yeah.
Soaring and I love the interplay with Jerry, but it got more and more Jerry, I think, probably as Lane was less and less reliable to show up to the studio, that kind of thing, and Jerry took more weight on. So hearing it be Lane's show, I think I really appreciated that over the last week listening to this. I also like that even in the darkness, the dankness of this, there's at the very end.
Sexual chocolate, baby!
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that part. What is that?
It's from Coming to America, the band playing at the fundraiser was Sexual Chocolate. That came out in 1989. So I just, obviously he was a fan, or they were a fan of that movie, and just throw in at the very end of your record the serious like rah, rah thing, and then Sexual Chocolate, baby. And I remember hearing that and being like, that's cool.
It's surprising listening to the record. It doesn't fit in at all.
So they were having fun, and it doesn't sound like they're having fun throughout the course of the record, but they were. All right, so 1990 was a varied year in music, but some really cool stuff was popping, and I think we covered a nice array of it today. But Alice in Chains, I know you all know it. You've heard the songs. You probably heard Man in the Box a million times. But I encourage you to go revisit Facelift. I found a lot more there than I thought there was when I was younger. So highly recommend Alice in Chains, Facelift.
All right, so we went back in the DeLorean to 1990 and checked
again.
Yeah, sorry.
If my calculations are correct.
So we presented some interesting albums from 1990. What did we learn?
1990. I mean, it's definitely a transitional period in music. I mean, you have hip hop breaking through to the mainstream, and you have obviously the beginning of the grunge movement happening. You have a bunch of things kind of coming to an end in 80s rock. I mean, I don't know. I think the good stuff, at least for me, it's yet to come in the decade, but it's cool to hear kind of like, I don't know, we talked about before on the show, it's like how the decades aren't really delimiters of music styles, or just, 10-year increments, and you can kind of hear some things from the 80s bleeding over into the 90s, but there's also a lot of cool new ideas that are just taking root here. So for me, probably not my favorite year in music, but I think there's a lot of good ideas here that would become pretty interesting in a few years.
Yeah, for me, it was less about what was going on in music and more about just thinking about the years of my pre-adulthood and how they were full of music and memories. And I'm just really thankful that I had the opportunity to drink all this in, that I lived a life where I wasn't having to struggle. I had food to eat, I had a place to live, and leisure time to listen to music and let that be the soundtrack to my life. So That got this exercise going back to 1990 made me think a lot about that time and how free I was to just drink it all in. Thanks, Mom and Dad.
And eat Cool Ranch Doritos. Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I guess I remember this time fondly because, again, it's when I was really getting serious about music. My family had a CD player, I think, since like 1987, but I finally got one, for my bedroom that year. And in fact, that Pet Shop Boys CD was one of the first ones I had. So it was just, it was an exciting time. And there really is a lot of interesting music, particularly like in the alternative area, because it's before it kind of, really blew up and kind of got hijacked by MTV, so groups like, Sonic Youth and the Pixies, Jane's Addiction, it was really,
Husker Du.
Yeah. So it was a more, I think it was just a colorful time in music.
Yeah, living color, you could say.
And that's one to grow on.
I'm your density. I mean, your destiny.
All right, boys and girls, it is that time once again. Gather around, put on the old hypercolor t-shirts, and we can breathe colors on each other's clothes.
Nice.
Let's give that wheel of musical destiny a spin and see what fate has in store for us next week.
Are you prepared to have your mind blown? It is time to explore rock music at its most progressive. This week you will be exploring 1970s progressive rock albums. Buckle in, boys. It's going to get weird.
Ooh, 70s prog rock.
Ooh, should be fun.
Yes.
Nice. Quick reminder, we do have 2 open Album Nerds Hall of Fame votes in progress. We're voting on Sly and the Family Stones, there's a riot going on, and Roxy Music's Avalon. If you have an opinion, either yay or nay, you can go to our website, albumnerds.com, or join us on Discord, albumnerds.com/Discord, and rock the vote, get involved.
What's your favorite progressive rock album from the 1970s? What else are you listening to? Let us know. Join fellow album nerds on Discord at albumnerds.com/Discord. You can email us at podcast@albumnerds.com and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Album Nerds. Please subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast app. And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so via PayPal at albumnerds.com/support.
Thank you for joining us here on the Album Nerds podcast. We'll catch you next time with some prog rock.
Get ready for my 10-minute drum solo here. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch you next week.
Must have been love, but it's over now. I tried.
Thank God it's over now.
I needed more air.
Need some air supply.
That was the joke.